Good morning. I think we've got everyone here. Welcome to our special webinar on the subject of litter and fly tipping. Currently, the Scottish Government is carrying out a consultation on the new strategy for litter and fly tipping, and we're obviously keen to get as much conversation and debate going as possible. So we have a panel here this morning to answer your questions around the topic, and the panellists come from a range of organisations who are involved in the consultation and are here to offer their insights on this topic. So before we move ahead, I'll just say that for those wishing to submit questions, you can do that via the network that you're viewing this webinar on. We can't promise to get through all of them today, but we'll make sure that we respond to everybody after the event if we don't get through them all. So first off, I'd just like to introduce everybody, or everyone from the panel can introduce themselves. So first we have Sarah Letzinger from the Scottish Government.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I lead on litter and fly tipping in Scottish Government. I sit in the Zero Waste Unit, which looks more widely at other waste policy areas.
Excuse me, and we have Kim from Zero Waste Scotland, Kim Young.
Hi there. Yeah, I manage the litter and fly tipping prevention team at Zero Waste Scotland, and we work closely with Scottish Government and also other partners, including Keep Scotland Beautiful and SEPA. And our kind of main role is to look at data quality and consistency so that we can better understand the issues that we're dealing with, and kind of use that data and the evidence that we gather to design interventions and policy to help tackle the problems.
And next we've got Katie Murray from Keep Scotland Beautiful.
Good morning, thanks Claire. Yes, I'm Katie Murray. I'm the Environment and Police Services Manager at Keep Scotland Beautiful. So we are an environmental charity with a vision of a clean, green, sustainable Scotland. So we aim to change behaviour to improve our environment, the quality of people's lives, their well-being and the places that they care for. And we've got over 20 years experience in working in local environmental quality, and we've been working closely with Scottish Government and Zero Waste Scotland and SEPA on the development of the new strategy and consultation.
And our final panellist is Craig Fraser from SEPA.
Hi, I'm Craig Fraser, Policy Officer in SEPA's National Waste Unit, providing advice on all areas across waste legislation. Fly tipping is a joint responsibility of SEPA and local authorities, and what our team looks to do is provide links with our enforcement and environment performance colleagues who are dealing with the incidents on the ground and feed their learnings back into strategies such as this.
Thanks everybody, and I should just add, I'm Claire Munro. I'm in the communications team at Zero Waste Scotland, and I'll be helping to host the webinar this morning. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so there will be the opportunity to either watch it again or for people who couldn't join us to get it after the event as well. So I'll just move on then to looking through some of the questions that we've had submitted before the event. So the first one, also you can add any more questions I should add in your network comments box as well, and we'll try and get to those. Our first question is about the previous litter and fly tipping strategy for Scotland. So this one is for Sarah from the Scottish Government. The question is, was the previous strategy a success?
So there was a review that was completed in 2019 of the previous national litter strategy, and that outlined some of the actions that had taken place over sort of the 5 years of the strategy. And I think it showed that there's been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of great work that's been done by a number of different organizations, but we recognize that there is still some more work to do, which is why the Scottish Government has committed to developing a new national litter and fly tipping strategy, and that's really going to require some collaborative effort to sort of deliver on those actions.
Okay, thanks. And Katie, do you have anything?
The first one for a mute fail. Yeah, so absolutely, I think you know, with any strategy, we'd have challenges and opportunities, and I think in light of this sort of the new wider context that we're all working in at the moment, I think that it's time for a new strategy which presents really great opportunities for us all to work collaboratively together, which, as Sarah will point out, I'm sure later on as well, was a key theme for this new strategy.
Thanks for that, Katie. Should add my apologies. I forgot to ask Sarah if she would like to share a presentation that gives an overview of the litter and fly tipping strategy. So apologies for that. It always happens when it's live. Sarah, if you'd like to share your presentation with us, that would be great. And then we'll go back to the questions again.
Yeah, no problem. Let me know if you cannot see my screen. So I just thought I would spend 10 or 15 minutes going through the sort of background to the litter and fly tipping strategy, and then some of the proposed actions to tackle litter and fly tipping. I probably won't have time to really touch on everything in a huge amount of detail, but the consultation document does set out sort of what we're proposing, and it gives a lot of background to these actions. And then I'll just briefly touch on sort of the next steps and what happens after the consultation closes. So, yeah, as I mentioned, Scotland's first national litter strategy was published in 2014, and a review was completed of this, and it is available on the Scottish Government website. Recognizing that there is still that litter and fly tipping still pose a challenge, and that the political landscape has shifted quite significantly since 2014. Scottish Government committed to developing a new national litter and fly tipping strategy. So this has been developed, as we mentioned, in partnership with Zero Waste Scotland, Keep Scotland Beautiful, and SEPA. So Kim, Craig, and Katie are just a few of the people that have been working on this consultation. The strategy focuses on three main themes, and these are behaviour change, services and infrastructure, and enforcement. And I'll just sort of touch on some of those in a bit more detail in a second. Data and research is a very integral part of the strategy, and it's something that cuts across the three themes. The national litter and fly tipping strategy does focus on the terrestrial environment, but there is a marine litter strategy, which is also available for consultation. I think it's open until the 23rd of March, and I'd really encourage people to look at that as well. We do work very closely with Marine Scotland, as we recognize that there is an interaction between our two strategies and these environments. So under behavior change for litter, we aim to ensure that individuals organizations have a greater understanding and awareness of the problems that are caused by litter, not just to the environment, but also to sort of society and communities. So we've proposed conducting research on the behaviors that lead to littering, and this will help us to identify sort of what the priority is and where we need to sort of focus our resources. And we can also use this research as an evidence to develop a sustained national anti-littering behavior change campaign that can be delivered sort of consistently across Scotland over a long period of time, and build on sort of some of the previous campaigns like Zero Waste Scotland, Scotland is Stunning. Under services and infrastructure, we are aiming to ensure that Scotland's services are fit for purpose. And by this, we mean that people are able to take responsibility for their behavior and dispose of their waste appropriately. And we also want to prioritize action and innovation that proactively prevents litter. So there's quite a few different actions that we've proposed in this theme. Data is a really big and important part of this. So we've proposed a number of actions to sort of improve the consistency and quality of data that is collected, as it's really important to know where litter is happening, when it's happening, and sort of what is actually being littered, because that will really help us to develop targeted responses. We've also proposed increasing the use of citizen science. So this is data that's collected by the public. It's something that's been used and done quite a bit in the marine environment. So the Marine Conservation Society helps to support a lot of this, and we'd like to sort of learn from that and apply it in the terrestrial environment. And then we've proposed using this data to explore the use of flexible and innovative interventions. So an example of this could just be something as simple as looking at, I don't know, temporary bins in hotspots at certain times of the year to help prevent litter from happening. We have also proposed some actions to try and create a more sort of joined up and consistent approach between duty bodies. And so one way we've proposed of doing this is by establishing an action focus group to help facilitate this information sharing. And finally, we've proposed some actions to help to support community groups, recognizing the significant work that they do. And one of these actions, we've proposed creating a litter hub that can provide some information on, how to do a litter pick, possibly health and safety information. But we ask in the consultation, this is one of the questions where we ask more detail of that, if people support this, what they would like to see. And so the final theme is enforcement. And we are aiming to ensure that there's a strong and consistent enforcement model that promotes positive behaviors, but then also acts as a deterrent. So we've proposed conducting an evidence review of enforcement practices, as we think this will sort of provide evidence and information to inform next steps. So subject to the outcome of this review, we've proposed exploring raising the fixed penalties from £80, and then also exploring alternative penalties. So this could be things like litter picks, or looking at sort of like compulsory education for people that are caught littering. There was a previous consultation for the circular economy bill, and one of the actions that was consulted on in that was to have powers to issue fines to the registered keeper of a vehicle that littering occurs from. And so that is also something that we're looking to take forward under the strategy. And finally, in this theme, we have also proposed reviewing and developing further guidance on enforcement best practices. So I'll just move on to these themes for fly tipping. So very similarly, under behavior change, we're aiming to improve fly tipping messaging. We want people and businesses to really understand their responsibilities in disposing of waste, and also how to do it. So once again, we've proposed conducting some research on the behaviors that lead to fly tipping, as that will really help to target any behavior change interventions. And then use it as evidence base to develop a sustained national anti-fly tipping campaign. We've also proposed creating a single information point that has some advice on the disposal of commonly fly tipped materials, just to have sort of a one place that people can come to get some more information regardless of where they live. So under services and infrastructure, we're aiming to make sure that there's a resilient national framework that provides services that are effective for not only preventing fly tipping, but if it does happen, to tackle it effectively. So once again, data collection is a really important part of this theme, and we've proposed a number of actions very similar to litter to help sort of improve the data that we have to help develop these targeted responses. We've also proposed reviewing dumb dumpers. So this is currently a tool that's hosted on the Zero Waste Scotland website, where the public can report fly tipping incidences. They can also do it directly to their local authority. And we would just like to review this to ensure that there is a fit for purpose mechanism for people to report fly tipping. And we've also proposed to explore flexible and targeted approaches to waste disposal. Again, sort of what this looks like, I think, will depend on the sort of the data that is collected, but through the engagement that we've done with local authorities, some ideas have been things like looking at mobile household waste and recycling centers, or putting skips in certain areas where there might be a lot of waste at certain times of the year. We have also proposed some actions to help information and resource sharing, just to support a sort of more joined up approach in the way that fly tipping is tackled across Scotland. We're establishing a fly tipping forum, and the first meeting is in a couple of weeks, and this will be attended by sort of duty bodies and other key stakeholders, and this is a sort of place that we propose using to facilitate this. We also recognize that private landowners are adversely affected by fly tipping, and so we've proposed providing some further guidance or updating the guidance that already exists, as well as exploring the use of technology to help deter fly tipping on their land, and also to explore the sort of other financial support mechanisms to help support private landowners. So finally, for this theme under enforcement, we have proposed a number of actions to help strengthen the current enforcement model and make sure that it's fit for purpose. So very similar to littering, we think that there needs to be an evidence review of the current enforcement practices to really inform next steps. We've proposed raising fixed penalties to the current maximum, which would be £500 for fines that are issued by local authorities, police in Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park, and then £1,000 for SEPA. But we would also, subject to the outcome of this review, explore raising them further. We've also proposed exploring civil penalties and reviewing the organizations that currently have powers to enforce fly tipping. In the previous circular economy bill consultation, they asked about taking powers to enable the seizure of vehicles that have been used in fly tipping. And so this is something that we are looking to take forward under the new strategy. And we've finally proposed reviewing and developing further guidance and enforcement best practices to support those that are involved in enforcement. So I hope that I recognize it was a very quick whistle-stop tour through the consultation document. I hope it kind of gives a bit of a flavor of what we're looking at, but there is really a lot more detail in the document itself. And the consultation is open until the 31st of March. The easiest way is to respond online through the Citizen Space website. None of the questions are compulsory, so you can just go through and answer the ones that you feel most strongly about or are most important to you. We do ask for some more detailed information on not just do people support this, but sort of what you would like to see, and just getting as many responses as possible is really important because it will help to shape the final strategy. So after the consultation is closed, we'll analyze the responses and we'll produce a report that's going to be published online. Where permission is given, we'll also be publishing the consultation responses. And just to really reiterate that, these responses are really important to shape what the final strategy looks like.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a really informative tour of some of the proposed content in a new strategy for litter and fly tipping, and I'm sure that will have prompted some questions. We have had some questions coming in while the presentation was going on, but first I'm going to return to the questions that we had submitted in advance for the panel. So I hope everyone's ready to help answer some questions. So this one, I'm actually going to go to you again, Sarah, first on this one. Can you tell us why the Scottish Government is looking at one strategy that combines both litter and fly tipping?
Yeah, so I guess one of the outcomes of the review was that that litter and fly tipping are separate issues. They do require separate sort of actions to tackle them. However, there are some times where these issues are interconnected, and by having it sit under one strategy, it allows us to do that. And also they're both sort of equal importance, which is why we wanted to publish them together in one strategy.
That's great, thanks. Could I maybe ask Kim from Zero Waste Scotland, given that Zero Waste Scotland also within our remit, we deal with both litter and fly tipping as well, if there's anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is a step forward from the last strategy, where we almost had litter as a priority and fly tipping as an intervention. And I think moving forward with it, with this new strategy and the proposal that we have, litter and fly tipping sitting as two effective halves of the strategy, I think shows that they are, both equally important issues, but very different issues with very different behaviours and potential solutions. So I think this is, it's really important that we do it this way. And by keeping them together, there is an awful lot of overlap. A lot of the data is very similar. A lot of the, the ways we can, we can look at the patterns and the, the learnings that we can take from the data and the the evidence that we find. A lot of that overlaps between the two. So I think this is, it's really important that we take this forward in this way, understanding the differences but also understanding the similarities at the same time.
Thanks, Kim. So our next question that's been submitted is something of a statement. And Katie, I'm going to come to you on this one and see what your views are. So the question is, those who litter don't care about the environment or the mess they make. How will they be identified and targeted through this strategy?
Thanks, Claire. I think that's a good question. So the strategy recognises that no one community is going to be the same. So although there's a really valuable place for a national campaign that's outlined in the strategy too, we know that there's no kind of blanket approach that would work in all local communities, because all of our communities have very different characteristics. So what the new strategy aims to recognise is how we identify through research and then target, based on that evidence, those groups and communities where there are barriers to behaviour change. So when we do this, we need to find a balance between qualitative and quantitative data to firstly sort of identify what those barriers to behaviour change are, and then developing a targeted approach to interventions thereafter. So, for example, Keep Scotland Beautiful have recently developed a set of baseline data on public perceptions and attitudes on litter and littering behaviour, and that's intended to work in parallel with the quantitative data that's collected through our local environmental audit and management system. So we can almost draw parallels from both, or we can better understand where the perceptions don't quite match reality. And that's all really valuable information in sort of researching and planning for those targeted interventions. So we can also match that up to citizen science surveys, for example, and terrestrial litter, and overall all of that work would aim to sort of address what we know are these really persistent barriers to behaviour change.
That actually leads nicely into our next question, Katie, which is about data. In relation to litter specifically, the person's asking, we've been gathering data for years and yet the problem seems to be getting worse. Why is data so important?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I think the importance of a robust and sort of relatable data systems that really can't be understated. So currently, LEAMS, that I mentioned before, provides a kind of rich data set that validates perceptions, and it provides an evidence base. Gathering high quality data then is really crucial to sort of enable us to identify what exactly is driving our litter and fly tipping problems and challenges, and where the problems are worst and what the effective solutions might be. So, for example, through the LEAMS data that we gather, we know that cigarette litter, we know that food and drinks packaging are both hugely common, significant forms of litter in Scotland. So we have the opportunity to combine that quantitative data gathered by LEAMS and the Future Litter Monitoring System with the qualitative data that I mentioned earlier as well. And that would provide us with that more robust set of information, provides that ability to compare perceptions with what's actually found on the ground and the sources, and then that third dynamic of citizen science too. And similarly in the future, that robust data set would be crucial and enable us to evaluate any action that we take and any new kind of strategic approaches that we would want to adopt to ensure that they're working. And I guess we need to be aware as well that, of course, there are challenges within that. So for example, how easily data can be shared. So from the transition of like the current system from LEAMS to new litter monitoring system, as that continues to progress, I guess that'll provide a new digital platform. It uses spatial analysis, and it will improve our ability to share and use relatable data sets. So with that kind of increased accessibility for duty bodies and statutory undertakers, then there's that real potential to improve collaborative working practices. And again, that's something that's at the heart of the strategy.
Thanks, Katie. If I could maybe move on to you, Craig, in relation to fly tipping specifically, what's the role of data and why is it so crucial?
Thanks. So I think a lot of the things that Katie just mentioned there with regards to litter absolutely ring true for fly tipping as well. We need that strong evidence base to understand what materials are being fly tipped and whereabout they're being fly tipped across Scotland. I mean, we can have good estimates of where we think they are originating and what materials we'd expect to maybe find, but it can certainly highlight local areas that are maybe being blighted by a certain type of fly tipping and help to understand whether that's a business that's involved or whether that's actually a lack of infrastructure in that area. And it helps us dig down into those kind of things and helps us build a better base for making policies from. So again, I would just echo that. A lot of what Katie said is very, very true for fly tipping.
Thanks very much. Now, our next question is on an issue that always sparks a lot of debate. It's the issue of prosecutions for litter and fly tipping. So again, Craig, as the regulator, if I could come to you on this one, why are there so few prosecutions for litter and fly tipping?
There's a few reasons. I think we'd all like to see maybe a few more prosecutions for fly tipping. I think that's a fair thing to say across regulators, but there's a few reasons. Lack of evidence is one of the key ones, particularly when we're going out and investigating fly tipping incidents. There just isn't often the evidence there to tie it back to who's fly tipped or whose waste it potentially was. And that can make it really challenging for taking any steps forward with regards to kind of bringing around justice for that. And even when there is evidence, it can be difficult to put forward the case to actually be able to take forward a prosecution. And I think that's just because it's competing with other more serious offences, you could say, with regards to assaults or other crimes for court time. And it's just one of those challenges that we face. One thing I would echo, though, is that prosecutions are just one aspect of enforcement, and there are other enforcement tools available to ourselves and to local authorities. And I think that's something that we should be focusing on as well, and looking at how to better use those things rather than purely relying on prosecutions, particularly where the evidence is difficult to obtain.
Thanks for that. Sarah, given the situation that Craig's outlined there, how will the new strategy sort of incorporate an approach to prosecutions?
Sorry. Is I guess, as I kind of outlined in the presentation, is that there's a number of different things that we have looked at. I think it's really important to, I guess, not look at any of these actions in isolation and consider them as a whole, that if we're able to effectively prevent litter from or fly tipping from happening, or at least reduce it, then it can help focus resources when it comes to enforcement on sort of the more serious cases. I think at the moment it's quite difficult for people to investigate everything that's happening.
Yeah, it's a tough issue for sure. So another issue that has just recently been in the news, many of you watching will have seen the BBC Scotland disclosure programme, Dirty Business, that was broadcast in the past few weeks. It's been much talked about, and that programme highlighted a fairly bleak situation with fly tipping, particularly regarding the involvement of organised crime groups in the issue. And again, this is one I'm going to go to the regulator first. Can we actually stop these groups from fly tipping and disposing of waste illegally, Craig?
So I think, particularly in the programme, it kind of highlights two slightly different issues. The first being that large-scale unauthorised disposal of waste by the organised crime groups that you see in the show. And I think these situations are far more complex than what we'd really look to tackle in this strategy in terms of the other types of crime that are involved. And I think that they tried to reflect that in the actual programme itself. And these things are better tackled by partnership working, such as through like the Serious Organised Crime Task Force. And that's where that sort of would sit. The other one, though, is that kind of areas blighted by several small loads fly tipping. I think it was a gasworks in the programme that was used the example of that. And I think this is where the strategy can put forward proposals and actually start to make a difference.
I think we might have slightly... Oh, are you back with us, Craig? You stuck for a minute there. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
Sorry about that. I don't know where exactly it cut off, so apologies for that. But yeah, so it's really what Sarah was saying earlier about some of the proposals, the information sharing, maybe the powers around vehicle seizures. That's the sort of things that would start to potentially make a difference at really tackling some of the where this material is coming from. But I think it's also an individual responsibility, you know, and everyone can actually have a role in preventing this from happening, in terms of checking that the person that you're handing your waste to has a waste carrier's license, and asking that they're whether they're taking it to a site or where they're taking it. And I think by doing this and by tackling this group more effectively, we can actually free up resource to try and address those larger scale incidents that I think we all find quite shocking in the show.
Thanks, Craig. So our next question is a bit of a broader one, and I'm going to come to you, Kim, from Zero Waste Scotland. The question is, are there other active policy areas with developments coming down the track which might have an impact on litter?
Yeah, so there's quite a few policy areas that are kind of in progress at the moment. The one which people probably have heard a lot about is the deposit return scheme. That's where when that comes into force, 20 pence deposit will be paid on plastic bottles, glass bottles and metal cans. And then when you bring these items back for recycling, you'll get your 20 pence deposit back again. So the idea behind that would be, you know, these items now have a value, so people are much more likely to recycle them and are less likely to just litter them. So that's coming into force in 2023. So that should make a big difference for those items, and mean that we have a lot less littering. The other areas, single-use plastics is obviously another as a hot topic as well that people feel very strongly about. So we have regulations that are due to come into force in June. So that means effectively a ban on things like plastic cutlery, plastic plates, polystyrene cups, and those sort of polystyrene kind of clamshells that are used for fast food. So with these being banned, and there's a number of other items as well, these will no longer be littered, which is going to make a big difference. And because plastic doesn't decompose, or takes hundreds and hundreds of years to decompose, we're not stuck with a situation where we're going to be left with these just ending up in our streets and potentially ending up out in our countryside as well. So that those regulations coming in June will should make a big difference. The other one as well, which is probably something that people are less aware of, is extended producer responsibility, otherwise known as EPR. So this is a kind of policy area which involves working with the actual producers of the items that are potentially going to be littered. So one of the main areas of EPR that we're looking at is packaging. So all sorts of packaging. If something is in a box or a bag or a container, that's packaging. And so Zero Waste Scotland and the Scottish Government are working with producers across the UK to bring in an extended producer responsibility. And the idea is being that the packaging would become more reusable, more recyclable, and potentially we also have the producers having to contribute to the cost of disposal and even the cost of clearing up littering and fly tipping as a result of those items. So all those kind of that collection of changes should make a big difference there as well. Another EPR areas that we're kind of looking at as well are things like for batteries, for waste electricals, mattresses. So we've got the fly tipping side of things there as well. So in time, all of these things together should start to make a big difference to to what ends up on the ground by preventing them from even becoming waste in the first place, making them more reusable and recyclable, and avoiding littering and fly tipping completely.
Thanks for that, Kim. This is the last one of our questions that were submitted in advance, and it's very topical as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic, which, as we know, has had a huge impact right across society and an impact on future policy making. So the question is, what will be done about PPE litter? And Katie, if I could come to you first on that one.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, we know that PPE litter has increased, obviously, over the last while, and that's shown up in the LEAMS data that we mentioned earlier. But I know that Scottish Government have taken a few steps to address that kind of the increased amount of PPE litter that's been seen as a result of the pandemic, and that they've issued guidance on that. And that Zero Waste Scotland's also developed the Kim can correct me on this, the Face It, Reuse, Beat Single Use campaign as well, which will encourage the public to dispose of face coverings and other PPE responsibly as well.
Yep, Face It was actually, yeah, it was indeed one of our campaigns. Kim, would you like to add anything more on any of our work on PPE? And I'll maybe ask Sarah as well for an overview about this one.
Yeah, so yeah, as Katie says, we brought in a campaign initially back in the spring of last year, just in response to the fact that, you know, we had this new litter stream that hadn't existed a year previously. The idea being encouraging people where possible to reuse face masks in particular, and you know, if reuse isn't possible, and we appreciate it's not always possible, to dispose of items properly. So, you know, for example, people that are out and about, you know, in other people's homes, gloves and aprons and masks in general, you know, sometimes they have to be single use. So if they are single use, you know, encouraging people to dispose of them, you know, in the appropriate manner. So as I say, that initially ran in last spring, and then we launched it again in just before Christmas there in December, because we were aware that more people would be out and about, so potentially, you know, out in the streets wearing face masks. So we launched that again, and we did that in collaboration with a number of partners, local authorities and other agencies across Scotland, to try and get the word out together. So there's actually a toolkit that we've got with a whole bunch of assets, posters and social media assets. So if anybody wants to have a look at that, it's on the Zero Waste Partners website. And there's still those bits and pieces are still available there if anybody, you know, wants to promote that themselves and share that. And yeah, that will continue, as you know, as PPE is still something that we continue to use. We will continue to promote those messages going forward.
Sorry about that. I couldn't find my unmute button there for a second. So that's the end of all of our pre-prepared sort of pre-advanced questions. So we'll move on to the questions that we've received during the webinar. So the first one is, what is the intended time for the production of the final strategy? And Sarah, if you could answer on that one, that would be great.
Yeah, apologies. I realized I left quite a key piece of information off of my presentation. So we are planning to publish the final strategy in the summer, although this really does depend on sort of what kind of responses we get, as I said, because they'll really shape what's in the final strategy.
That's great, thank you. So we've got another question. It's about the connections with household waste recycling centres. So some businesses and organisations are unable to access household waste recycling centres due to restrictions. So for example, on the size of a van and other sort of financial charges. Why is this happening, and wouldn't making better use of recycling centres help to stop fly tipping? Or is there anything that will be addressed at a local level to help these businesses better afford necessary waste disposal? Now, I appreciate that one's one perhaps more for the recycling experts, but perhaps Sarah, if you could shed any light on that one first, in the sense of, you know, recycling support for and disposal for small businesses.
Yeah, so I know there's a sort of some work going on more on the recycling side, which I'm not as familiar with, but I guess in regards to preventing fly tipping, I think that's definitely something that has come up in sort of the engagement that we've done so far. And this is where, I guess, having a sort of consistent and joined up approach, which we outline in our strategy, is kind of maybe help with some of this, is just so that there is a better understanding of the requirements and sort of when household recycling centers are open. And so that's definitely something that we're looking at. So I think the Flytipping Forum that I mentioned is potentially going to be a space where we're going to be able to get stakeholders together where they can kind of discuss these issues and learn from each other. And, I think also data is important if we can understand where fly tipping is occurring and potentially how sort of these facilities impact that. Will just help us be able to sort of respond appropriately.
Thanks, Sarah. Craig, I wonder if there's anything you can add from a SEPA perspective around, the responsibilities of businesses when it comes to waste disposal.
Yeah, so I think I'd echo a lot of what Sarah said there, actually. In regards to it does seem to be a local authority decision with regards to, what they're allowed to let into their household recycling centres. And I think it's what this does, actually, the strategy as a whole provides an opportunity for us to actually go and discuss and to compare across local authorities where these issues are maybe occurring and where, some local authorities may be seeing success in allowing certain vans in compared to other ones and how that's kind of impacted. So I think the strategy is positive in terms of providing the space to discuss that. But yeah, businesses do obviously have a responsibility to try and actually get their waste disposed of correctly. And I think it's not simply an excuse to say that it's not financially viable, but I think it is an open opportunity for us through the strategy to actually discuss what some of those barriers are and to try and help remove them where possible.
Thanks very much, Craig. The next question is related to recycling. It's more of a comment, really. It says there's still a lot of confusion about what can and cannot be recycled. For example, envelopes with cellophane windows, till receipts, softer plastics, polystyrene, etc. It doesn't help that different regions have different rules. I think I'm probably quite well placed to answer that, because that's one of my areas of work is looking at recycling communications. So it's absolutely a fact that, yes, confusion is definitely an issue when it comes to recycling. On the different systems aspect, and Sarah will know this, that there is joint work going on between COSLA and the Scottish Government on a household waste recycling charter with the intention of providing greater alignment between local authorities and the services they provide, which should help to improve infrastructure and improve clarity for residents across Scotland. In addition to that, the Scottish Government is investing £70 million over 5 years, beginning this year, in improving recycling infrastructure, which Zero Waste Scotland is helping to administer. And that is, heavily really about helping to tackle confusion, to provide better infrastructure at curbside and also at household waste recycling centres. And there's going to be a lot of communications going on alongside that. Zero Waste Scotland itself has conducted a lot of research in this area, and we know that there is confusion, and we know that people often want to do the right thing and they want to put the right thing in the right bin. So we've developed a tool, recycling sorter tool, that's available on our website, and if you put your postcode in, you can find out exactly what you can and can't recycle in your local authority area there. So we developed that in response to try and help improve that awareness as much as possible. But yes, I mean, definitely it's an area that's high priority for the Scottish Government, for Zero Waste Scotland, and for other agencies. And I think the fact that there's a link with litter there is definitely something that's under a lot of discussion. I don't know if there's anyone else in the panel that would like to add anything to the sort of the general point about the links, because both those kind of comments I think have brought up about potential links between recycling and litter. I don't know, Kim, would you like to add anything on that aspect?
No, I would just echo what you've said, Claire. I think it is the fact that we do have 32 different ways of doing things, I think can be confusing for people, but the tools that Zero Waste Scotland has online now, I think, should help that. And if anybody is ever isn't sure what should or shouldn't go into their bin, that tool now should make that difference there and help people, work out what can and can't go into their bins. But I think one of the things that we're trying to promote is just, as well as people thinking more about, what waste am I actually producing? Is there any way I can reduce my waste as well? So that, if you think about what we call the waste hierarchy, we're looking at reducing, reusing and recycling, in that order. So that's something we're trying to encourage more and more of as well. So that way we're actually putting less in our bins in the first place. So hopefully with a combination of all these things, it should become less of a problem going forward.
That's great, thanks. Katie, I just wonder if you've got anything that you'd like to add, because I know Keep Scotland Beautiful is kind of looking at the littering issues holistically.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Again, I'll be reiterating just what some of Kim and Sarah had said there earlier. Just really around litter not being a silo issue. It doesn't work independently of everything else, and absolutely it's related to recycling and all of the issues that Kim picked up on earlier in our question around policy. We know that single-use items continue to be a really significant factor in littering behaviour, for example, and all of that is related directly to circular economy and ultimately climate emergency in this entire bigger picture. And maybe going off slightly on that one, but then it's important to look at it conversely and appreciate that litter also has an impact on other policy areas as well. So it obviously reflects directly onto things like health and well-being and perception of crime and safety. So it's all this huge interconnected web, and that's why we look at it in that really holistic way.
Great, thanks. And another question slightly related to recycling. It's about the deposit return scheme for bottles and cans. The question is, how will that fit in with household recycling? And does that mean we'd no longer lose our blue bins? Now, it's a wee bit, as I appreciate that's a wee bit off topic, but Sarah, I wonder if you would maybe like to just say a little bit about, in general terms, how the DRS will work practically for households.
Yeah, so the deposit return scheme is only covering sort of plastic bottles and cans, and so it works by paying a deposit when you purchase the bottle, so it's 20p. So then you can return it to a store and get that 20p back. So we're trying to encourage that people return those items that way to be recycled. But you'd still use your blue bins for other recyclable items.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And just to, I think Kim touched on this earlier, but just to reiterate, we do expect that the DRS will have a significant impact on volumes of litter, glass bottles, plastic bottles, metal cans, which are some of the most commonly littered items. So as I think everyone in the panel has pointed out, litter doesn't exist in isolation. It is linked to various other policy initiatives. So final comment just to end on then, we've had a brilliant selection of questions coming in advance and during this, but a really thought-provoking comment, I think, just to end on, that somebody has sent in, just to say, I think it's shocking the amount of rubbish is getting worse. Some people just don't seem to care, but we have a beautiful country, we should be proud of it and want to keep it that way. So I think that's a really important comment to end on. It's something for us all to think about. We've got this, spectacular natural beauty and natural advantages linked to living in Scotland, and I think that we're all pretty dedicated to try and make the best of that. So thank you to whoever submitted that comment. Thank you also to the panel for your insights. Really helpful, really useful, and thank you to everyone who submitted a question. The range and topicality of the questions, I think, probably will be helpful to a lot of viewers in terms of providing information on this issue. Just to finish up, just to say this webinar is recorded. It's going to be available from the Zero Waste Scotland website. We'll be putting out communications as well about how you can view it. So please do that, and also please, if you haven't already, I would urge you to respond to the consultation as well. Thanks very much.